The corporate holiday party was in full swing when my wife decided to detonate our marriage. I should have seen it coming. Hazel always did have a flair for dramatic timing. I stood at the open bar, nursing my second whiskey and watching the usual parade of forced cheer unfold across the hotel ballroom. Marketing executives air-kissed like old friends while plotting each other's demise. Sales reps told the same tired jokes they'd been recycling since Halloween. The whole scene reeked of expensive cologne and cheaper ambitions. "Another whiskey, sir?" The bartender's question pulled me from my observations. "Make it a double," I replied, already sensing this evening would require extra fortification. That's when Hazel commandeered the microphone from the DJ booth. She looked radiant in her emerald dress, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her auburn hair caught the light perfectly as she tapped the mic with manicured fingers. "Excuse me, everyone. Could I have your attention for just a moment?" The crowd turned toward her like sunflowers following the sun. Hazel had that effect on people, a magnetism that drew them in and made them forget their own thoughts. It's what made her so effective in marketing, and apparently so effective at concealing affairs. "I have some wonderful news to share with all of you tonight," she continued, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used in client presentations. "Nate and I are expecting our first child." The ballroom erupted in applause and congratulations. Champagne glasses clinked together in celebration. Women rushed forward to embrace Hazel while men slapped my shoulder and offered hearty congratulations I hadn't asked for. But I wasn't watching the crowd. I was watching Wes Farrow, Hazel's boss, and the company's chief executive officer. The man who'd built his reputation on maintaining composure during hostile takeovers and boardroom battles had just turned the color of old newspaper. Wes stood frozen near the executive table, his champagne flute halfway to his lips. For a split second, his carefully constructed façade crumbled completely. Raw panic flashed across his features before he caught himself and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. I might have missed it entirely if not for the woman standing beside him. Mina, Wes's wife of 15 years and one of the city's most respected family attorneys, followed her husband's stare with laser precision. Her dark eyes moved from Wes to Hazel and back again, and I watched recognition dawn across her sharp features like sunrise over broken glass. Mina's expression remained perfectly neutral, but her knuckles went white around her champagne stem. She leaned closer to Wes and whispered something that made him flinch visibly. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Hazel's recent late nights at the office, the mysterious client dinners that never appeared on any calendar I could access. Her sudden interest in expensive lingerie she claimed was just for herself. The way she'd started password protecting her phone after 3 years of leaving it unlocked on our kitchen counter. "Nate, there you are!" Jade Marrin materialized beside me with the predatory smile she wore to PTA meetings and charity auctions. Hazel's best friend since college, Jade had the uncanny ability to appear whenever drama was brewing. "Isn't this exciting? Hazel's been glowing for weeks now." "Has she?" I managed to keep my voice level, despite the growing certainty that my marriage was built on lies. "Oh yes, we've been talking about baby names during our girls' weekends. She's so happy." Jade's eyes sparkled with the kind of malicious joy that comes from knowing secrets others don't. Girls' weekends that had become increasingly frequent over the past 8 months. Girls' weekends that always seemed to coincide with Wes's business conferences in nearby cities. Girls' weekends that Hazel returned from looking refreshed and secretive. The crowd began to disperse as the DJ resumed playing background music. Hazel made her way through well-wishers, accepting congratulations and pregnancy advice with practiced grace. She looked genuinely happy, happier than I'd seen her in months. "Darling." She reached me and stood on her toes to kiss my cheek. "Wasn't that wonderful? Everyone's so excited for us." "For us," I repeated, studying her face for any sign of guilt or deception. But Hazel had always been an excellent actress. It's what made her so successful in marketing, the ability to sell any story with complete conviction. "We should probably head home soon," she said, glancing at her watch. "I'm exhausted, and the doctor says I need plenty of rest during the first trimester." First trimester, which meant she'd been pregnant for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. I tried to remember the last time we'd been intimate, really intimate, not just the perfunctory encounters that had become our norm. It had been at least 2 months, maybe 3. "Of course," I said. "Whatever's best for the baby." As we made our rounds, saying goodbye to colleagues and friends, I caught sight of Mina near the coat check. She was watching us with the intensity of a prosecutor studying a hostile witness. When our eyes met, she didn't look away or offer the polite smile expected at such gatherings. Instead, she held my gaze for a long moment before turning to collect her coat. Wes was nowhere to be seen. The drive home was quiet except for Hazel's occasional comments about the party and her excitement about the pregnancy. She chattered about nursery colors and baby furniture while I navigated the familiar streets of our neighborhood, my mind racing through months of small details I'd dismissed or ignored. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in one of the city's most desirable suburbs. We'd bought it 3 years ago when Hazel's promotion to marketing director came with a substantial salary increase. The mortgage was ambitious, but manageable, especially with my consulting income providing a steady supplement to her corporate salary. I pulled into our driveway and shut off the engine. The automatic garage door opener had been broken for 2 weeks, another item on my growing list of household repairs that kept getting pushed aside for more urgent matters. "I think I'll take a bath and go to bed early," Hazel said as we entered through the front door. "This excitement has worn me out completely." "Good idea. I'll be up in a bit. Just want to check some emails." She kissed my forehead, a gesture that once felt affectionate but now seemed patronizing, and headed upstairs. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close and water running before retrieving my laptop from the home office. My consulting business specialized in IT security for mid-sized companies. It was steady work that paid well and allowed me to maintain a flexible schedule. More importantly, it had taught me how to find information that people preferred to keep hidden. I started with Hazel's social media accounts, looking for patterns in her posts and check-ins. Nothing obvious jumped out, but I noticed she'd been tagged in fewer photos with Jade over the past few months, despite claiming to spend more time with her. The girls' weekends that Jade had mentioned weren't documented anywhere on either of their public profiles. Next, I checked our joint credit card statements for the past 6 months. Most of the charges were routine: groceries, gas, her monthly salon appointments. But there were several charges at upscale restaurants on dates when she'd claimed to be working late or out with Jade. Restaurants that were expensive enough to suggest business dinners or romantic encounters rather than casual meals with girlfriends. The most damning evidence was a charge at a boutique hotel downtown from 3 weeks ago. The same weekend, Hazel had supposedly gone to a marketing conference in Springfield. I'd offered to drive her to the airport, but she'd insisted on taking a taxi to avoid parking fees. There had been no conference in Springfield that weekend. I'd checked. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Coffee shop on Elm Street, 2 p.m. Mina." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "I'll be there." The water had stopped running upstairs. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my home office, listening to the familiar sounds of Hazel getting ready for bed. The house we'd chosen together, the life we'd built, the future we'd planned, all of it suddenly felt like an elaborate stage set designed to hide a performance I hadn't known I was watching. Tomorrow, I would learn just how deep the deception went. Tonight, I would lie beside my wife and pretend I still believed in the fairy tale she'd been selling. But first, I needed to prepare for the conversation that would either confirm my worst suspicions or prove that paranoia and whiskey had gotten the better of my judgment. I had a feeling it was going to be the former. The coffee shop on Elm Street was the kind of place where lawyers met clients they didn't want to be seen with in their offices. Tucked between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique, it attracted the sort of crowd that minded their own business and asked no questions. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where we could speak privately. The barista, a college student with purple hair and multiple piercings, barely looked up from her textbook when I ordered a black coffee and a blueberry muffin I had no intention of eating. Mina entered precisely at 2 o'clock, scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing threats and opportunities. She wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her dark hair was pulled back in a style that suggested she'd come directly from court or a client meeting. She ordered a cappuccino and joined me at my table without any of the small talk that usually preceded difficult conversations. Mina had always struck me as someone who viewed pleasantries as a waste of billable hours. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling into her chair and fixing me with the same intense stare I'd noticed at the party. "I assume you've had some time to think about last night." "I've thought about little else," I admitted. "Your husband's reaction to Hazel's announcement was illuminating. Wes has never been good at hiding his emotions. It's what makes him effective as a CEO. People always know where they stand with him. Unfortunately, it also makes him terrible at concealing extramarital affairs." The bluntness of her statement caught me off guard, even though I'd suspected this was where our conversation was heading. Hearing it stated so matter-of-factly made it real in a way that my late-night suspicions hadn't quite managed. "How long have you known?" I asked. "I've suspected for about 6 months. I've had proof for 3 weeks. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "I hired a private investigator when Wes started working late every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Apparently, those were the nights Hazel stayed late as well." She opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. The images were clear and damning. Hazel and Wes entering a downtown hotel, sharing intimate dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, embracing in the parking garage beneath their office building. The investigator documented 47 separate encounters over 8 months. Mina continued in the same clinical tone she might use to discuss a merger agreement. Hotels, restaurants, his downtown apartment that he keeps for late nights at the office, and twice at our vacation home in the Berkshires when he thought I was visiting my sister. I studied the photographs, recognizing Hazel's expressions and body language. She looked relaxed and happy in ways I hadn't seen at home in months. The woman in these pictures was animated and engaged, laughing at Wes's jokes and touching his arm with casual intimacy. "There's more," Mina said, producing a second set of documents. Financial records showing joint purchases, hotel reservations made with corporate credit cards, and text message logs that my attorney obtained through proper legal channels. The text messages were perhaps the most painful evidence to review. Hazel's words to Wes were playful and affectionate, full of inside jokes and references to shared experiences. She wrote to him the way she used to write to me during our early relationship, with genuine warmth and anticipation. "The pregnancy announcement caught me off guard," Mina admitted. "Wes has been pushing for us to have another child for the past 2 years. Our youngest just started high school, and I've been reluctant to start over with diapers and sleepless nights." "But you think the baby is his?" "The timing suggests it's possible. Wes had a vasectomy reversal 6 months ago without telling me. I found the medical bills when I was gathering evidence for my attorney." She paused to sip her cappuccino. "He claimed it was a surprise for my birthday." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with sickening clarity. Hazel's sudden enthusiasm for starting a family after years of claiming she wasn't ready. Her insistence that we needed fertility treatments, despite never having tried to conceive naturally for more than a few months. The mysterious medical appointments she'd been attending that never appeared on our shared calendar. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Cooperation. My attorney believes we can expedite both divorce proceedings if we work together rather than against each other. Shared evidence, coordinated legal strategies, mutual testimony when necessary. It made sense from a practical standpoint. Two scorned spouses with similar interests and complementary evidence could accomplish more than either could manage alone. But there was something cold about the way Mina discussed dismantling our marriages, as if she were negotiating a business transaction rather than the end of two families. I need to confirm a few things first, I said. The evidence you've shown me is compelling, but I want to conduct my own investigation before I make any commitments. Of course, but don't take too long. Hazel's pregnancy announcement was strategic. She's trying to establish her narrative before you have a chance to challenge it. I suspect she'll file for divorce within the next few weeks and claim the moral high ground as a wronged pregnant wife. Mina was right. Hazel had always been 3 steps ahead in any conflict, whether it was a disagreement with neighbors about property lines or a dispute with contractors about renovation timelines. She planned her battles carefully and struck first whenever possible. There's one more thing you should know, Mina said as she gathered her documents. Jade Marrin has been facilitating this affair from the beginning. She provided alibis, apartment keys, and coordination for their meetings. Her loyalty to Hazel runs deeper than friendship. She's been actively helping your wife deceive you. The betrayal stung more than I expected. Jade had been a regular presence in our home for years, joining us for dinner parties and holiday celebrations. She'd been maid of honor at our wedding and had helped Hazel plan my surprise birthday party just 6 months ago. The idea that she'd been orchestrating my wife's infidelity while sitting at my kitchen table was almost harder to accept than the affair itself. How do you know about Jade's involvement? The investigator followed her as well. She has keys to Wes's downtown apartment and has been seen entering and leaving at strategic times to provide cover stories. Last Tuesday, she was photographed leaving the apartment 20 minutes before Hazel arrived for what was supposed to be a girls' night movie marathon at Jade's house. I finished my coffee while processing this information. The scope of the deception was staggering, not just an impulsive affair, but a carefully orchestrated campaign involving multiple people and elaborate cover stories. Hazel and her accomplices had been planning this for months, while I'd been obliviously going about my daily routine. I'll be in touch within a few days, I told Mina as we prepared to leave. I need to verify some things and decide how I want to proceed. Don't wait too long, she warned again. Hazel strikes me as someone who doesn't leave anything to chance. If she's pregnant with Wes's child, she'll want to secure her position before either of us can challenge her story. The drive home gave me time to think about my options. I could confront Hazel directly and demand the truth, but that would only give her an opportunity to craft a more sophisticated lie or claim that my accusations were baseless paranoia. I could hire my own private investigator, but Mina's evidence was already comprehensive and convincing. Or I could conduct my own investigation using the skills I'd developed in my consulting business. Corporate IT security had taught me how to trace digital footprints, recover deleted files, and find evidence that people thought they'd hidden. The same techniques that helped companies identify internal threats could help me uncover the full extent of my wife's betrayal. Hazel's car was in the driveway when I arrived home. She was in the kitchen preparing what looked like a healthy dinner: grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, and brown rice, the kind of meal she'd been eating more frequently since announcing her pregnancy. "How was your afternoon?" she asked, kissing my cheek as I entered the kitchen. "You were gone longer than I expected." "Just some client meetings. You know how it is. Small business owners always want to squeeze in one more question about network security." "Well, I'm glad you're home. I've been reading about prenatal nutrition, and I think we should both start eating healthier. It's important for the baby's development." She seemed genuinely excited about the pregnancy, which made the situation even more complicated. If the child was Wes's, was she planning to pass it off as mine indefinitely? Or was this part of some larger strategy to secure financial support from multiple sources? That sounds great, I said. Whatever's best for you and the baby. After dinner, Hazel settled into the living room with a pregnancy guidebook, while I retreated to my home office. I had work to do, and it wasn't the kind that appeared on any client invoice. I started by accessing our home network logs to see what devices had been connected and when. Hazel's phone showed regular activity during times when she claimed to be at girls' weekends or working late. More interesting were the location services that showed her phone had been at Wes's downtown apartment on multiple occasions when she'd told me she was elsewhere. Next, I checked our shared cloud storage account, where Hazel backed up her photos. She'd been careful to avoid uploading anything obviously incriminating, but metadata told a different story. Photos supposedly taken during girls' weekends with Jade showed location stamps from hotels and restaurants where she'd actually been with Wes. The most damning evidence came from her email account, which she'd never bothered to secure because she assumed I had no reason to access it. Months of correspondence with Wes revealed the emotional and physical intimacy of their relationship, along with detailed planning for their secret meetings. But it was an email from 3 weeks ago that stopped me cold. Hazel had written to Wes about taking a pregnancy test and her excitement about our little secret finally becoming real. She'd also mentioned her plan to announce the pregnancy at the office party to see how you handle the surprise. The pregnancy announcement hadn't been a spontaneous moment of joy. It had been a calculated move designed to put pressure on Wes and establish Hazel's position as the mother of his child. She'd been playing chess while the rest of us thought we were playing checkers. I printed the most relevant emails and photographs, storing them in a folder I locked in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, I would call Mina and arrange another meeting. But tonight, I had one more task to complete. Hazel was still reading in the living room when I joined her on the couch. She looked up with a smile and patted the cushion beside her. "Listen to this," she said, reading from her book. "The baby's heart starts beating at around 6 weeks. Isn't that amazing? Our little one already has a heartbeat." "That is amazing," I agreed, settling beside her and putting my arm around her shoulders. "Have you thought about when you want to tell our families?" "I was thinking we could call them this weekend. Your mother will be so excited. She's been dropping hints about grandchildren for months." My mother had indeed been asking about grandchildren, usually during our weekly phone calls when she'd mention friends whose children had started families. The irony that she might finally get her wish through circumstances like these wasn't lost on me. "What about the father?" I asked casually. "I mean, what about telling my father? I know he's been looking forward to being a grandfather someday. Of course we'll tell him too. This baby is going to be so loved by everyone in both our families." She snuggled closer to me, and for a moment I could almost pretend that everything was normal. That we were just a happy couple expecting their first child, making plans for a future filled with family dinners and birthday parties and school plays. But the weight of the evidence in my desk drawer made that fantasy impossible to maintain. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of dismantling the life we'd built together. Tonight, I would hold my wife and listen to her talk about our future while knowing that she was carrying another man's child. The pregnancy book lay open on her lap, filled with information about prenatal vitamins and doctor's appointments and nursery preparations. Hazel had bookmarked dozens of pages and made notes in the margins about things she wanted to remember or discuss with her doctor. She was either an exceptional actress or genuinely excited about becoming a mother, possibly both. The complexity of her deception suggested careful planning and emotional investment that went beyond simple adultery. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete reconstruction of her life with me as an unwitting supporting character. "I love you," she said quietly, her head resting on my shoulder. "I love you too," I replied, and in that moment, it was still true. But love wouldn't be enough to overcome what she'd done, and by tomorrow, the process of unraveling our marriage would begin in earnest. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. I was reviewing client contracts in my home office when my phone rang with a call from an unknown local number. Nate Trevon? The voice was unfamiliar, older, with the gravelly tone of someone who'd spent decades smoking cigarettes. Speaking. Who's calling? Name's Frank Morrison. I work security at your wife's office building. Got your number from the employee directory. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly alert. About what? About the camera footage you're going to want to see. Meet me at Murphy's Bar on State Street at 6 tonight. Come alone and bring cash. This conversation never happened. The line went silent before I could ask any follow-up questions. I stared at my phone, wondering if this was legitimate or some kind of setup. But Frank Morrison's name was familiar. I'd seen it on visitor badges during the few times I'd picked Hazel up from work. Murphy's Bar was exactly the kind of establishment where conversations disappeared into the haze of cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey. I arrived at 6:15 to find Frank Morrison sitting in a corner booth, nursing a beer and watching the door with the paranoid attention of someone who'd seen too much corporate malfeasance. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and the soft physique of a man who'd transitioned from active police work to private security. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, and he had the tired eyes of someone working a job that paid the bills but didn't inspire much enthusiasm. "You Nate?" he asked as I approached his table. "That's me. Frank Morrison?" He nodded toward the empty seat across from him. "Sit down. Buy me another beer first. This is going to take a while." I signaled the bartender for 2 beers and waited for Frank to explain why he'd called. The bar was nearly empty except for a few regulars watching a basketball game on the mounted television. The kind of place where conversations were conducted in low voices and nobody paid attention to other people's business. "I've been working security at that office building for 12 years, Frank began after the bartender delivered our drinks. "Seen a lot of things, heard a lot of things, kept my mouth shut about most of it. But what your wife and her boss have been doing, that's different." "Different how?" "Because they've been using company property for their personal business, and because they've been sloppy about it. Security cameras don't lie, and digital footage doesn't forget." Frank reached into his jacket and withdrew a flash drive, setting it on the table between us. 8 months of footage, supply closets, executive bathrooms, parking garage stairwells, after-hours access to Wes Farrow's office, 47 separate incidents, all time-stamped and archived. The number matched what Mina's investigator had documented. I picked up the flash drive, noting that it was still warm from Frank's jacket pocket. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because Wes Farrow is a piece of garbage who treats his employees like disposable machinery. Because your wife has been lying to the front desk about working late when she's actually meeting him upstairs. And because I've got a daughter your age who deserves better than what these people are dishing out." Frank finished half his beer in one long swallow. "Also because Mina Corrin's attorney contacted me yesterday with a subpoena for this footage. Figured you should see it before it becomes evidence in a courtroom." "How much do you want for it?" $500 cash. Not because I need the money, but because free information doesn't feel trustworthy. People value what they pay for." I reached for my wallet and counted out $500 bills, sliding them across the table. Frank pocketed the money without counting it. "There's something else you should know," he said. "Your wife's friend Jade has keys to the building. Wes gave them to her about 6 months ago, claiming she needed access for some marketing project. But she's been using them to provide alibis and cover stories." "What kind of cover stories?" "She'll show up on camera entering the building when your wife is supposed to be working late, then leave 20 minutes later through the parking garage. Makes it look like they were having a work meeting when actually your wife was upstairs with Wes." The sophistication of their deception was becoming clearer. This wasn't just an affair. It was an elaborate conspiracy involving multiple people and carefully coordinated timing. Jade wasn't just providing emotional support to Hazel, she was actively participating in the logistics of the betrayal. "How long have you known about this?" "Started noticing patterns about 4 months ago. Wes would stay late on the same nights your wife worked overtime, but they'd never be in the same place at the same time according to their keycard access. Then I started watching the camera feeds more carefully. Frank finished his beer and stood to leave. Word of advice: don't confront them directly until you've got all your legal preparations in place. Wes Farrow didn't become CEO by backing down from fights, and your wife strikes me as someone who plans her battles carefully. After Frank left, I sat in the bar for another hour reviewing the footage on my laptop. The images were clear and comprehensive, showing Hazel and Wes in compromising situations throughout their workplace. More damaging were the timestamps that proved they'd been meeting during hours when Hazel had told me she was in client meetings or working on urgent projects. The drive home gave me time to think about my next steps. I had enough evidence to confront Hazel and demand the truth, but Frank's advice about legal preparation made sense. If she was planning to file for divorce and claim the moral high ground as a wronged pregnant wife, I needed to be ready with a comprehensive response. Hazel was in the kitchen when I arrived home, preparing another healthy dinner while humming softly to herself. She looked genuinely content, and for a moment I wondered if she was having second thoughts about her affair with Wes. "How was your day?" she asked, standing on her toes to kiss my cheek. "Productive. Closed a new contract with a manufacturing company downtown. How about you?" "Busy but good. Wes has us working on a major proposal for a potential client in Chicago. It might mean some travel in the coming weeks." The lie came so easily that I almost admired her skill. According to the camera footage, she'd spent most of the afternoon in Wes's office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. There was no Chicago client, no major proposal, no business travel, just another cover story for their ongoing affair. "Travel might not be a good idea while you're pregnant," I suggested, "especially during the first trimester when you're still adjusting to the changes. The doctor says travel is fine as long as I'm careful about staying hydrated and getting enough rest. Besides, this client could be worth millions to the company. I can't let personal concerns interfere with professional opportunities." She was already laying the groundwork for future deceptions, creating plausible reasons to be away from home for extended periods. The Chicago client would probably become a regular excuse for overnight trips that were actually romantic getaways with Wes. After dinner, I retreated to my home office and called Mina Corin's direct number. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been expecting my call. "I've reviewed the evidence," I told her. "I'm ready to discuss coordination." "Good. Can you meet tomorrow morning? My office at 9. "I'll be there. And Mina? I have additional evidence that might be useful. Security camera footage from their office building." There was a pause before she responded. "How did you obtain that?" "Let's just say that corporate security takes a dim view of employees who abuse company property for personal activities." "Bring everything you have. My attorney will want to review it before we finalize our strategy." That night, I lay awake listening to Hazel's peaceful breathing beside me. She slept soundly, without the restlessness that usually accompanies guilt or anxiety. Either she was completely comfortable with her deception, or she genuinely believed that her actions were justified. I thought about the emails I'd read, particularly the one where she'd expressed excitement about our little secret finally becoming real. The pregnancy wasn't an accident or an unintended consequence of the affair. It was a goal she'd been working toward. But why? Was she planning to leave me for Wes? Or was she trying to secure financial support from both of us? The answer would probably become clear in the coming days. Hazel had always been strategic in her thinking, weighing options and calculating outcomes before making major decisions. The pregnancy announcement at the office party had been carefully timed to maximum effect. Whatever came next would be equally well planned. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Jade knows you're investigating. Be careful. F." Frank Morrison was apparently monitoring more than just security cameras. If Jade knew about my investigation, she would certainly warn Hazel and Wes. That meant I had limited time to gather evidence and prepare my legal strategy before they moved to protect themselves. I got up quietly and went to my home office, where I spent the next 2 hours copying files and organizing evidence. By morning, I would have everything I needed to prove Hazel's infidelity and challenge her version of events. But first, I had to survive one more night of pretending that our marriage was built on something more substantial than lies and carefully crafted alibis. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Mina Corrin's law office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that had been converted from an old bank. The conference room where we met still had the original vault door, now serving as an impressive backdrop for difficult conversations about the dissolution of marriages and families. Her attorney, David Walsh, was a thin man in his 50s who specialized in high-stakes divorce cases involving significant assets and complex financial arrangements. He reviewed my evidence with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen every possible variation of marital betrayal. "This is comprehensive," he said, after spending 20 minutes examining Frank Morrison's security footage. "Combined with Mrs. Corrin's private investigator reports, we have documentation of a sustained pattern of deception involving multiple parties." "What's our next step?" I asked. "We file simultaneously," Mina replied. "Coordinate our divorce petitions to prevent either Wes or Hazel from establishing a preferred narrative. David has already prepared the paperwork. We just need your approval to proceed." I reviewed the divorce petition, noting the specific allegations of adultery and emotional abandonment. The language was precise and damning, supported by timestamps and photographic evidence that would be difficult for Hazel to dispute. "There's one complication we need to address," David said. "The pregnancy announcement creates additional legal considerations regarding paternity and child support obligations." "I want a paternity test as soon as it's medically safe," I told him. "If the child isn't mine, I don't want any financial or legal responsibility." "We can request court-ordered testing, but it won't be available until after the first trimester. In the meantime, Hazel might try to establish your presumed paternity by filing for spousal support and claiming pregnancy-related expenses. Can we prevent that? We can challenge it, but the process will take time. Your best protection is to establish a clear timeline of the affair and document her deception regarding the pregnancy." Mina leaned forward in her chair. "There's something else you should know. Wes received a promotion offer from a company in Seattle last week. He's been considering whether to accept it." "Running away?" "Possibly, or eliminating evidence. If he relocates before our divorce proceedings are complete, it becomes much more difficult to enforce financial settlements or custody arrangements." The scope of the conspiracy was expanding beyond simple adultery into potential fraud and evasion. Hazel and Wes weren't just having an affair. They were planning an exit strategy that would leave their spouses to deal with the aftermath while they started fresh in a new city. "How long do we have before he makes a decision about Seattle?" "According to my sources, he needs to respond by the end of the week." 3 days to gather additional evidence and file legal paperwork that would prevent Wes from disappearing with my wife and their unborn child. The timeline was tight, but not impossible if we moved quickly and coordinated our efforts. David Walsh handed me a stack of documents to review and sign. "I'm also recommending that you secure your financial assets immediately. Joint accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios, anything Hazel has access to should be protected. She hasn't shown any signs of financial planning, no unusual spending or account transfers." "That you know of," Mina corrected. "Hazel strikes me as someone who keeps her cards close to her chest. I'd be surprised if she hasn't been making preparations for months." The meeting concluded with a plan to file divorce petitions the following morning and serve papers simultaneously to prevent either Hazel or Wes from gaining a strategic advantage. I would spend the evening gathering financial records and securing assets, while Mina handled the legal coordination. The drive home took me through the neighborhood where Jade Marrin lived, in a converted Victorian house that had been divided into expensive condominiums. On impulse, I parked across the street and waited to see if she was home. 20 minutes later, Jade emerged from the building carrying a gym bag and talking animatedly on her phone. Even from a distance, I could see the excitement in her gestures and expressions. She was either discussing workout plans or sharing gossip about the latest developments in Hazel's pregnancy drama. I followed her car to an upscale fitness center on the other side of town, then waited in the parking lot while she attended what I assumed was a yoga class or personal training session. The gym was the kind of place where wealthy suburban women gathered to exercise and exchange information about their neighbors' private business. An hour later, Jade emerged looking refreshed and energized. She was no longer on her phone, but she moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had plans to execute and people to contact. Instead of driving home, she headed downtown toward the office building where Hazel and Wes worked. I followed at a distance, curious about why she would be visiting their workplace in the evening when most employees had gone home for the day. Jade parked in the visitor section of the building's garage and used a key card to access the elevator. Frank Morrison had mentioned that Wes had given her building access, but seeing her use it so casually reinforced the extent of her involvement in the affair. I waited in my car for 30 minutes before Jade reappeared, now carrying a manila envelope in addition to her gym bag. She looked around the parking garage carefully before getting into her car, suggesting that whatever she'd retrieved from the building was sensitive enough to warrant caution. The envelope was thick enough to contain documents or photographs, possibly evidence that Hazel and Wes were trying to remove before legal proceedings began. If they were planning to relocate to Seattle, they would want to eliminate any materials that could be used against them in divorce court. I followed Jade back to her neighborhood but didn't see her enter her building. Instead, she parked outside a coffee shop and went inside, still carrying the envelope. Through the window, I could see her sitting at a corner table, apparently waiting for someone. 10 minutes later, Hazel arrived. My wife looked tired and stressed as she joined Jade at the corner table. They spoke in low voices while Jade showed her the contents of the manila envelope. Whatever they were discussing caused Hazel to look increasingly agitated, shaking her head and gesturing emphatically. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes before Hazel abruptly stood and left the coffee shop without the envelope. Jade remained at the table for another few minutes, then gathered her things and headed back to her car. I waited until both women had driven away before entering the coffee shop. The barista was cleaning tables and didn't pay attention as I examined the corner where they'd been sitting. Jade had been careful, no papers left behind, no obvious clues about their discussion. But she hadn't been careful enough. A small piece of paper had fallen beneath the table, apparently torn from a larger document. I retrieved it discreetly and examined it in my car. It was a fragment of a medical document with Hazel's name and what appeared to be pregnancy test results. The partial text suggested multiple tests conducted over several weeks, along with estimated conception dates that would help establish paternity. Hazel was building a medical record to support her claims about the pregnancy timeline. But she was also creating evidence that could be used against her if the dates didn't align with her story about when the affair began. The drive home gave me time to process what I'd observed. Jade wasn't just providing emotional support to Hazel, she was actively helping to manage evidence and coordinate strategy. The manila envelope probably contained documents they were trying to hide or destroy before legal proceedings began. More troubling was Hazel's obvious stress during their conversation. She'd looked genuinely worried, possibly because their carefully planned deception was beginning to unravel. If Jade had warned her about my investigation, Hazel would be scrambling to protect herself and secure her position. I arrived home to find Hazel in the living room, surrounded by pregnancy books and baby magazines. She looked up with a smile that seemed forced, as if she was making an effort to appear normal despite whatever concerns Jade had shared with her. "How was your day?" she asked, patting the couch cushion beside her. "Busy. New client meetings, contract negotiations. The usual." I sat down and glanced at the magazines spread across the coffee table. Planning for the nursery already? Just getting ideas. It's never too early to start thinking about what we'll need. She picked up a magazine featuring nursery furniture and color schemes. I was thinking we could convert the guest bedroom. It has good natural light, and it's close to our room. The guest bedroom that had served as my home office overflow and Hazel's craft room. Converting it to a nursery would require significant renovation and expense, the kind of investment that suggested she was planning to stay in our house rather than relocate with Wes to Seattle. That sounds like a good plan, I said. Have you thought about timing for the renovation? We'll want everything ready well before the baby arrives. I was thinking we could start in a few weeks. Get the major work done during the second trimester when I'll have more energy. Either Hazel was genuinely planning to raise the baby in our home, or she was maintaining the deception until she could execute whatever exit strategy she'd developed with Wes. Given what I'd learned about their level of planning and coordination, I suspected the latter. Speaking of planning, I said casually, have you given any more thought to telling our families about the pregnancy? Actually, I was thinking we could have dinner with your parents this weekend, and maybe invite my mother over next week. Involving our families would make the deception more complicated, but also more convincing. If Hazel could get our parents excited about becoming grandparents, it would be harder for me to challenge her story without looking like the villain who destroyed everyone's happiness. That sounds perfect, I agreed. My mother will be thrilled. We spent the rest of the evening discussing baby names and nursery themes while I mentally prepared for the legal battle that would begin in less than 12 hours. Hazel seemed genuinely excited about the pregnancy, which made me wonder if she'd convinced herself that the baby's paternity was less important than her desire to become a mother. But excitement wouldn't change the biological facts or erase the evidence of her affair with Wes. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed façade of our marriage would begin to crumble, and Hazel would learn that her strategic planning hadn't been quite as comprehensive as she'd believed. The last thing I saw before falling asleep was Hazel reading a pregnancy guide, making notes in the margins about prenatal vitamins and doctor's appointments. She looked peaceful and content, completely unaware that her world was about to change dramatically. In 12 hours, she would be served with divorce papers and forced to confront the consequences of 8 months of deception. Tonight, she could still pretend that her secrets were safe and her future was secure. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. The process server arrived at Hazel's office at 10:15 a.m., just as David Walsh had promised. I wasn't there to witness her reaction, but Frank Morrison sent me a text message 30 minutes later. Package delivered. Subject appeared shocked, left building immediately. I was meeting with my own clients that morning, maintaining the appearance of business as usual while my marriage imploded in real time. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping other people secure their digital assets while my own personal security was being systematically dismantled. Hazel called my phone 6 times between 10:45 and 11:30. I let each call go to voicemail, following David Walsh's advice to avoid direct contact until the legal framework was established. The voicemails started angry and became increasingly desperate as the reality of her situation became clear. Nate, what the hell is this? Call me back immediately. I don't understand why you're doing this. We need to talk. Please pick up your phone. This is crazy. We're having a baby. I'm coming home. We're going to work this out. By the time I finished my client meetings and returned home, Hazel's car was in the driveway and I could hear her voice through the front door. She was on the phone, speaking in the rapid, clipped tones she used when managing a crisis at work. No, Mother, it's not what you think. Nate's having some kind of breakdown. The stress of the pregnancy must have triggered something. I entered quietly through the kitchen door, listening as Hazel attempted to control the narrative with her mother. Through the doorway, I could see her pacing in the living room, still wearing the professional outfit she'd worn to the office. Of course the baby is his. What kind of question is that? I don't care what these papers say. His lawyer is obviously filling his head with paranoid fantasies. She paused, listening to her mother's response. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time since I'd known her, Hazel looked genuinely defeated. I don't know where he got these ideas. Yes, I work closely with Wes, but that's because I'm head of marketing. We have a professional relationship, nothing more. The lies came automatically, but they lacked her usual conviction. Hazel was improvising now, trying to salvage a situation she hadn't fully prepared for. The pregnancy announcement was supposed to strengthen her position, not expose her to legal challenges and public scrutiny. I have to go, Mother. Nate just came home. She ended the call and turned to face me. Her makeup was smudged from crying, and her hair had escaped the careful styling she maintained for work. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, vulnerable and uncertain rather than calculating and strategic. How could you do this to me? She asked, holding up the divorce papers. To us? To our baby? Our baby? I set my briefcase on the kitchen counter and loosened my tie. Is that what we're calling it? What's that supposed to mean? It means I know about Wes. I know about Jade's involvement. I know about the apartment downtown and the hotel receipts and the security camera footage. I know about all of it, Hazel. The color drained from her face as the scope of my knowledge became apparent. She'd been prepared to deny a general accusation of infidelity, but specific details about locations and accomplices suggested evidence that would be difficult to dispute. I don't know what you think you know, but I know that you've been planning this for months. I know that the pregnancy announcement was calculated to put pressure on Wes and establish your position. I know that you and Jade have been coordinating alibis and cover stories. I know that you've been lying to me about everything that matters. Hazel sank into the living room chair where she'd been reading pregnancy magazines the night before. The magazines were still scattered across the coffee table, now seeming like props in an elaborate performance rather than genuine preparations for motherhood. The baby is yours, she said quietly. Whatever else you think happened, the baby is yours. Prove it. I can't prove it until it's born and we can do a paternity test, which means you have 7 months to convince me that I should support you and a child that might not be mine. She looked up with something approaching her old fire. You can't just throw me out. I'm pregnant, Nate. I need stability and support during this time. You should have thought about that before you started planning your exit strategy with Wes. What exit strategy? The job offer in Seattle. The one Wes has been considering while you've been pretending to plan a nursery in our house. Hazel's expression shifted from defiance to calculation. She was processing new information and adjusting her strategy accordingly. The mention of Seattle had clearly caught her off guard, suggesting that Wes hadn't shared all of his plans with her. I don't know anything about Seattle, she said finally. Maybe you should ask him about it, assuming he's still taking your calls now that his wife has filed for divorce too. The revelation that Mina was also pursuing legal action seemed to hit Hazel harder than anything else I'd said. Her carefully planned affair was supposed to remain secret until she was ready to reveal it on her own terms. Simultaneous divorce proceedings meant that her timeline had been disrupted and her control over the situation had evaporated. Mina filed for divorce? This morning, about the same time you were served. Coordinated legal action based on coordinated evidence. Hazel stood and walked to the window, looking out at our neighborhood where everything still appeared normal and peaceful. Neighbors were arriving home from work, children were playing in yards, and life was continuing its ordinary rhythm while our marriage collapsed in spectacular fashion. What do you want from me? She asked without turning around. I want you to leave. Tonight. Find somewhere else to stay while we work out the legal details. I'm not leaving my house. It's not your house anymore. Check the mortgage documents. My name is the only one on the title. You have no legal right to stay here. She turned back to face me, and I could see her mind working through the implications. Hazel had always been detail-oriented, but she'd apparently overlooked some crucial legal realities in her planning. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. Maybe Jade has a spare room. Maybe Wes can help you figure something out. Maybe your mother would like to support her pregnant daughter through this difficult time. You're being cruel. I'm being practical. You made choices that have consequences. I'm not responsible for managing those consequences for you. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Walsh. Wes Farrow terminated from employment effective immediately. Morality clause invoked. Severance voided. I showed the message to Hazel, watching her face as she processed this new development. Wes's termination meant that his Seattle job offer might be her only option for financial stability, but it also meant that their secret relationship was now public knowledge within their professional circle. He lost his job? Morality clause in his executive contract. Workplace relationships that create liability for the company result in immediate termination without severance. Hazel sat down heavily on the couch, finally understanding that the situation was beyond her ability to control or manipulate. The pregnancy that was supposed to secure her future had instead triggered a cascade of consequences that were destroying everything she'd worked to build. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I'm changing the locks and having your belongings moved to storage. You can't do that. Actually, I can. David Walsh was very thorough in explaining my legal options. I left her sitting in the living room surrounded by pregnancy magazines and went upstairs to pack a bag. I would be staying at a hotel for the next few days while Hazel made arrangements to relocate. It wasn't ideal, but it was necessary to establish clear boundaries and prevent any accusations of harassment or intimidation. When I came back downstairs with my suitcase, Hazel was on the phone again. This time, her voice was pleading rather than commanding. Jade, I need your help. Can I stay with you for a few days while I figure this out? I couldn't hear Jade's response, but Hazel's expression suggested it wasn't the supportive reaction she'd expected. What do you mean you can't get involved? You are involved. You've been involved for months. Another pause, then Hazel's voice became sharp with anger. Don't you dare abandon me now. After everything we've been through together, everything we've planned. The call ended abruptly. Apparently, Jade's loyalty had limits that didn't extend to providing shelter for a pregnant woman in the middle of a contentious divorce. Fair-weather friends had a tendency to disappear when the weather actually turned bad. Having trouble finding accommodations? I asked. Hazel glared at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Nate. You think you're so smart with your lawyers and your evidence, but you don't understand what you're destroying. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to pretend that it wasn't already broken. I headed toward the door, then turned back for one final comment. By the way, you might want to call Wes and ask about his plans for Seattle, assuming Mina hasn't already changed his phone number. The last thing I saw before leaving was Hazel sitting alone in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of the life she'd systematically dismantled through 8 months of careful deception. The pregnancy magazines were still scattered across the coffee table, but now they looked like evidence of dreams that would never be realized, rather than plans that were taking shape. Tomorrow, she would have to face the reality of her situation without the safety net of our marriage or the financial security of Wes's executive position. The baby she was carrying would be born into a world very different from the one she'd imagined when she first decided to pursue her affair. But tonight, she could still sit in our house and pretend that somehow everything would work out according to her original plan. Tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in David Walsh's office reviewing the final settlement documents when Mina called with unexpected news. Wes accepted the Seattle job offer, she said without preamble. He's relocating next month. What about Hazel? That's the interesting part. He's going alone. Apparently their grand romance wasn't quite as solid as they thought. I leaned back in my chair, processing this development. Hazel had been staying at her mother's house since I'd asked her to leave, and our only communication had been through lawyers. I'd assumed she was planning to follow Wes to Seattle once the divorce proceedings were complete. Did he abandon her completely? According to my sources, he offered to help with relocation expenses and provide temporary financial support, but he wasn't willing to commit to a long-term relationship. The pregnancy complicated things more than he'd anticipated. It made sense from Wes's perspective. A secret affair was exciting and manageable, but a pregnant girlfriend and public divorce proceedings were liabilities that could damage his career prospects. The Seattle job offered him a clean start without the complications of his current situation. How did Hazel react? Not well, from what I hear. She's been calling his office and showing up at his apartment building. Security had to escort her out twice last week. The image of Hazel desperately pursuing a man who was trying to escape their relationship was both pathetic and oddly satisfying. She'd spent months carefully orchestrating her affair while maintaining control over every detail. Now she was experiencing the helplessness that came with being abandoned by someone she'd trusted. "There's something else," Mina continued. "I received a call from Jade Marrin's attorney this morning. Apparently Hazel has been threatening to expose Jade's involvement in the affair unless she provides financial support." Blackmail? Attempted extortion, more precisely. Jade recorded one of their conversations and turned it over to the police. Hazel could be facing criminal charges in addition to the civil divorce proceedings. The scope of Hazel's desperation was becoming clear. Abandoned by Wes and facing financial uncertainty, she was lashing out at everyone who'd been involved in her deception. But threatening Jade was a tactical error that could result in serious legal consequences. What kind of charges? Extortion, harassment, possibly fraud depending on what the investigation uncovers. Jade's attorney is being very thorough in documenting everything. I ended the call and returned to reviewing the settlement documents. The divorce would be finalized within 60 days, with minimal financial obligations on my part due to Hazel's proven infidelity and deception. She would receive temporary spousal support for 6 months, but only if she remained in the state and submitted to court-ordered counseling. The paternity test would be conducted as soon as it was medically safe, with results determining any future child support obligations. If the baby was mine, I would meet my financial responsibilities, but seek limited custody given the circumstances of the conception and Hazel's recent behavior. David Walsh returned from his phone call looking satisfied with whatever news he'd received. "That was the prosecutor's office," he said. "They're moving forward with charges against your wife for attempted extortion. Apparently, she made several threats against Jade Marrin that were recorded and documented." "What does that mean for our divorce proceedings?" "It simplifies things considerably. Criminal charges support our allegations of emotional instability and poor judgment. The court will be less sympathetic to her claims for extended support or favorable custody arrangements." The legal machinery was working exactly as it was supposed to, grinding through the evidence and producing outcomes based on facts rather than emotions. Hazel's strategic planning had been undone by her inability to accept that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. "There's one more development you should know about," David continued. "Wes Farrow's attorney contacted me yesterday with an interesting proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "He's willing to admit paternity and assume full financial responsibility for the child in exchange for you waiving any claims for damages related to the affair." I considered this offer carefully. If Wes acknowledged that he was the father, it would eliminate any uncertainty about my obligations and allow me to move forward without ongoing connections to Hazel and her child. But it also felt like letting him escape the consequences of his actions too easily. "What would that mean practically?" "You'd be completely free of any financial or legal obligations related to the pregnancy. Wes would pay child support directly to Hazel, and you'd have no involvement in custody or parenting decisions. And in exchange, you'd agree not to pursue claims for emotional distress loss of consortium, or other damages related to their affair. Essentially, you'd accept the divorce settlement as complete compensation for their actions. It was a clean resolution that would allow me to start fresh without ongoing complications, but it also meant that Wes would face minimal consequences for his role in destroying my marriage. I need time to think about it. Of course, but don't take too long. The offer expires when he relocates to Seattle. The drive home took me through the neighborhood where Hazel and I had planned to raise our family. The houses looked the same as they had 3 months ago, but everything felt different now. The future I'd imagined had been replaced by something entirely unexpected, and I was still adjusting to the new reality. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. The caller ID showed Hazel's number, the first time she'd contacted me directly since the night I'd asked her to leave. "Hello, Hazel." "Nate, we need to talk." Her voice was strained and tired, lacking the confidence that had once defined her personality. "Our lawyers can handle any communication that's necessary. This isn't about lawyers. It's about us, about our baby. Your baby. The paternity test will determine whether I have any involvement. Please don't do this. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. The baby needs stability, needs both parents. The baby needs honesty, which seems to be something you're incapable of providing." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Wes is leaving. He's abandoning both of us. That's between you and him. It has nothing to do with me. Everything's falling apart, Nate. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman who'd shared my life for 7 years. But then I remembered the months of deception, the carefully planned lies, the pregnancy announcement designed to manipulate everyone around her. "You should have thought about that before you decided to have an affair and try to pass off another man's child as mine." "I never meant for it to happen this way." "How did you mean for it to happen? What was the plan, Hazel? Were you going to raise Wes's child in our house while I paid for everything? Were you planning to leave me eventually, or just keep lying indefinitely?" Another pause. "I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were thinking very clearly. You planned every detail, coordinated with Jade, created elaborate alibis, and executed a months-long deception. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught." "I'm sorry, Nate. I'm truly sorry for everything." "I'm sure you are. Sorry that your plan didn't work. Sorry that Wes is abandoning you. Sorry that you're facing criminal charges for threatening Jade. But I don't think you're sorry for what you actually did." "That's not true. Goodbye, Hazel. Don't call me again." I ended the call and sat in my driveway for a few minutes, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where I'd planned to raise children and grow old with my wife. Those dreams were gone now, replaced by the reality of starting over at 42 with a clearer understanding of what I wanted from life and relationships. The house felt empty when I entered, but it was a clean emptiness rather than the hollow feeling that had characterized the final months of my marriage. Hazel's presence had become toxic long before I discovered her affair, filling our home with tension and unspoken resentment that I'd attributed to work stress and the natural challenges of a long-term relationship. Now I understood that the tension had come from her guilt and the constant effort required to maintain her deception. Living with someone who was systematically lying about the most important aspects of their life had created an atmosphere of instability that affected everything we did together. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mina. "Wes left for Seattle this morning. Didn't tell Hazel he was leaving early. Thought you should know." So Wes had decided to make his escape without even saying goodbye to the woman carrying his child. The grand romance that had justified months of deception and betrayal had ended with him sneaking out of town like a thief avoiding consequences. Hazel would discover his departure soon enough, probably when she tried to contact him and found that his phone number had been disconnected. The reality of her situation would finally become undeniable: abandoned by her lover, estranged from her husband, facing criminal charges, and pregnant with a child whose father wanted nothing to do with either of them. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to David Walsh, accepting Wes's offer to assume paternity and financial responsibility for the child. It was time to close this chapter of my life completely and move forward without any remaining connections to the web of lies that had defined the past year. The divorce would be final in 6 weeks. The paternity test would confirm what everyone already knew. Hazel would face the consequences of her choices without any support from the men she'd tried to manipulate. And I would begin the process of building a new life based on honesty and genuine connection rather than strategic planning and careful deception. The pregnancy magazines were still stacked on the coffee table where Hazel had left them. Tomorrow, I would donate them to a women's shelter where they might actually help someone who was genuinely excited about becoming a mother. Tonight, I would sit in my quiet house and appreciate the peace that came from finally knowing the truth about everything that mattered. The toast that had started this whole mess had indeed burned down the house, but sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen before you can build